Difficulty is a tricky thing for games. They're really the only thing that has to deal with it as a concept. With something like a movie, it doesn't even have to cross your mind, so it'll be too hard for people to watch in general. But with games, difficulty is the center point of many hot debates. How easy or hard should games be? How should settings be handled? Should you be allowed to talk about hard games if you can't beat them? Difficulty itself is also hard to handle and a large obstacle for any game designer. Too easy and people will be bored, too hard and people will give up. Well, that's what the general idea is, but that also isn't even true. There's games with absolutely no difficulty at all that are still beloved for what they do, and same for games that are truly difficult to get far in. Difficulty can mean everything in design, but also sometimes mean absolutely nothing at all. For some games, difficulty is part of their core identity. These tough-as-nails games pride themselves on giving players a true challenge. Reasons for this high difficulty can vary, from building a bleak and harsh tone, or just to make the gameplay more rewarding with learning and overcoming huge obstacles. Games like this use difficulty perfectly to enhance the experience while being careful as to never be unfair. But amongst many notable and wonderful games that use high difficulty well, one rose above the rest for me. So today, let's discuss 2018's Celeste. Celeste is a 2D platformer made by Maddie Thorson, and their team that now operates as Extremely OK Games, with help from talented Lena Rain for music. It released in 2018 for all platforms as a self-published game. The game itself is a tough-as-nails 2D platformer that originally started as a Game Jam product for Pico 8, inspired by old difficult NES and SNES games. It was later expanded into the full game we know today. The game follows Madeline, a young woman who tries to climb the imposing Celeste mountain while grappling with her own issues. Her journey up the mountain will be one of discovery, friendship, and acceptance. With its stellar level design, incredible controls and feel, and amazing story about mental health and overcoming it, it found great success and love, even being nominated for Game of the Year. It has had a lot of praise and discussion around it, so I may as well throw my 2 cents onto the pile. This is an absolutely fantastic game you should try to play before watching this video. It isn't really a game you can spoil at all, but it will tell a touching story you may not expect going into it, and it is so lovely as a nice surprise. But even beyond the story, Celeste is just such a fun game to play, and one I have sunk way too much time into doing almost everything I can, coming back to it to take on the challenge from last time. It's just such a rewarding game, and one that gets my highest recommendations for all the reasons we will discuss today. There isn't much else I want to say, so let's dive right into what makes this game absolutely amazing. Let's start with something a bit less important, but still a wonderful part of this game. The visuals are just absolutely outstanding with this game. The game is made with a wonderful pixel art style, reminiscent of, but more advanced than the 16-bit games of that era. The sprite work in this game is just so well done for how little they have to work with. It's a style that can look basic when you focus on a few sprites, but when everything comes together and is in motion, God, it's beautiful to look at. One small quirk I love to bits is how dynamic everything is. From the randomly falling snow on some maps, to other similar visual effects, and to just Madeline's hair flowing with how you move. It makes this world really feel alive, which in my experience I haven't seen many pixel games pull off super well. But this game isn't all pixel art. We also get a good share of excellent hand-drawn art for cutscenes and other such things, and I absolutely love this style. It just complements everything so well, and just looks absolutely adorable for these characters. It's just so polished in terms of visuals, and everything comes together for something that doesn't have a dull looking moment. And on the topic of visuals, let's talk about what blows the rest out of the water. The wonderful music crafted by Lena Raine. This OST. This game has to have one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. Lena crafts something that both expertly complements the game and is also just wonderful standalone music. Celeste has a sound that no other game truly does. It has a musical identity called completely its own, with that strange synth combined with the relaxing piano, creating a recognizable sound. And every single track is a banger! From the relaxing piano tunes and more relaxed areas where you can finally get some rest, to the intense, unnerving synth kicking up in tough, harrowing moments, to the synth turning more calming in those moments of pure wonder. The tracks are all distinctively Celeste and Lena in terms of how they sound, and also how every track works masterfully for the game. Most tracks have a style repeating themselves as they slowly begin to add more pieces to the mix, till the track finally reaches its full complexity and glory, just like how the levels in Celeste will do the same. This brings me to my last point about the music and how amazing it is, how the music complements the atmosphere of the game. I'll go into more depth with this when we reach the story and feels section, but the music complements the tone of overcoming the odds in ways I can't describe. Music can either be a calming pat on the back to say, hey, you did it, good job, with songs like Exhale or Madeline and Theo, anxiety-inducing when things reach their darkest hour, such as with In the Mirror or Star Jump, or even when it grows intense and intimidating, the music will still have this feeling of saying, don't give up, you can overcome this, such as with Confronting Myself, and especially Reach for the Summit, what I'd call Celeste's magnum opus in terms of music. But every single track is a magnum opus, so that can't mean too much. The soundtrack for Celeste is outstanding in terms of both being amazing music and also helping to set the tone and feeling of Madeline's journey from the ups to the downs to the rest in between. But speaking of that journey, let's talk about it in terms of gameplay, the core of Celeste's being. Celeste is one of the most polished games I played in terms of how it controls. Seriously, I don't think any other game has controlled this smoothly for me. It just feels so natural to move around in this world. Madeline is very quick and responsive with movement, and has just the right amount of weight to them to not feel floaty or heavy. It's just a feeling of smoothness that I can't describe, but this is very important for Celeste to nail, due to it being based around precise movement to clear challenges. And the moveset Madeline has to complete these challenges is so fun to use. You have two main moves that can be used in many different ways. The signature dash, which can be used in 8 directions and has so many advanced moves you can pull off with it. The thing is responsive and snappy to use, which makes for some super satisfying sequences using it. But this is also a game about climbing a mountain, so you can of course do some, well, climbing. The climbing is a very interesting mechanic. As with any surface that won't kill Madeline, you can just climb it for as long as you have stamina. This is a mechanic that you can use in so many ways, from finding secrets for players who like to explore, to allowing for players more new at the game to save their skin on some challenges, and to allowing for some of the much harder challenges for those experienced by pushing the limits of the stamina system. These two mechanics would be enough to carry a small game on their own, with just very basic challenges, but Celeste goes the extra mile and throws in unique mechanics for every single level. Every last one of these is just so fun to use, from the charging blocks and reflection, to making sure to not retread ground with Badeline, to these horrible things in the Celestial Hotel that make you have to time things and plan where they'll be. Every single one of these is so fun to use, and the game makes sure to push every single one to their absolute limit, especially in the B and C sides, which we'll discuss later. Now, this all sounds fun, but you need to prepare yourself for this climb because you will die a lot in this game. Celeste is not a game that pulls its punches in terms of difficulty. This game can be absolutely brutal sometimes, and this could easily go wrong and just make players frustrated and want to give up. But that never happened in my playthroughs. Celeste is a master of keeping frustration low and making the player never want to give up. There's a few things that help pull this off. The main one is that death doesn't really matter too much. Respawning is super fast in Celeste. 1 second after you die, you are straight back into it. On top of this, there's no life system, and the game never shames you for dying. So death is just a number, and the player is encouraged to take as many tries as they need for these challenges. The feeling of not wanting to give up is reinforced in the story, but also another way I find more interesting. The game makes everything feel like a small victory due to its layout. The levels are broken up into a lot of small screens, instead of a long level where you start over at the beginning or at sparse checkpoints. For me at least, this makes the game feel less like a challenge to get to the very end, but instead, it feels like a challenge to just get through this next part. Every screen you clear feels like a small victory, and with how bite-sized these screens are, it builds up this feeling that you can absolutely pull this off with enough tries. Then that feeling goes on to the next screen, and you just keep feeling this persistence to keep going no matter how much you die. Heck, this feeling is reinforced so much that even on the much bigger screens, I found myself finding it a small victory to clear the tiniest parts because it's one step closer to victory. Celeste handles its difficulty expertly through this design of building up persistence and determination in its players instead of frustration. And that is good because Celeste can have a lot of challenge for those who want it. This is another thing I love about this game, how you get to choose how far you go. You can just go straight to finishing the final chapter and then call it a day, which is satisfying enough for most players, but there's so many things you can choose to take on, such as strawberries scattered through the levels behind secrets and small challenges, the puzzles for the crystal hearts, the B-sides which are much tougher remixes of the levels, the optional core chapter, no, the C-sides, and the no-death golden strawberries. This game can go as far with its difficulty as you want it to, which is just a wonderful design. Do you want just a difficult but manageable adventure, or do you want a truly challenging experience? The choice is yours with this game. But all of this amazing gameplay also acts as the stage for the truly amazing story this game tells. So let's discuss that. Celeste is a game I didn't expect an emotional story from, but oh boy was I wrong with that one, because Celeste tells a story that is both important to tell and is absolutely unforgettable. The basic story is that of a young woman named Madeline, who decides that despite not having any experience, they have to climb a mountain. But not just any mountain, the mythical Celeste Mountain, which has many oddities to it as she climbs. As she ascends the mountain, she'll begin to run into some people along the way, and grapple with her own fears and anxieties that the mountain brings out of her. And I mean bring out of her literally, as the mountain gives part of her physical form, which we'll just call Badeline like most of the community does. This is where the core of the story comes in, as this is a story about mental health, which is the last thing I was expecting when I first played. Badeline is very obviously a stand-in for depression, anxiety, and other such disorders and problems many deal with. Madeline's journey involves her trying to come to terms with these problems and figure out how to overcome them, and I could easily imagine this going poorly in the execution and fumbling, but it doesn't. Celeste sticks the landing and handles this in such a respectful and mature way. I will need to go into some minor spoilers to discuss this in more detail, so if you want to go in completely blind like I did, skip to this timestamp. Badeline is more complicated than she seems at first. She'll just seem vindictive, mean, and antagonistic at the start of the game. She's nothing but a monster for Madeline to deal with, something that causes problems for no reason. She'll keep tripping Madeline up and bring out her fears and panic, which by the way is also expertly handled too. Madeline grows frustrated with her, but begins to find some peace with her connection to Theo, another climber, and after a chat with him, she confronts the problem. You fly up into the sky in an amazing sequence before confronting her. Madeline tells her she doesn't want Badeline anymore, and she's leaving her behind. She's beginning to have ways to handle them, like the feather trick Theo taught her, and now she can finally leave her problems behind. But it's not that simple. The game recognizes that you can't just run from your problems like this, especially for mental health. Your simple tricks won't always work, and you cannot run from yourself. This amazing section hammers this point in so well, and God, I love it. Madeline is taken to rock bottom both literally and metaphorically as she finally begins to reflect. She realizes that she can't run from part of herself. She realizes Badeline has a reason for what she does. She's scared. She's trying to protect Madeline, just in misguided ways. And God, at least from the anxiety interpretation of Badeline, this is absolutely perfect, because that's what it truly is. These thoughts aren't some boogeyman trying to hurt you. It's there for a reason and is just misguided. You can't try to fight them or just run away. You have to try to sort through it in order to get anywhere. Only one other small game has handled the talk of mental health this well. As someone who struggled with anxiety around the time I played this game, I was blown away to see it tackle these issues in such a mature and nuanced way like this. Mental illness is not something to run from. It's not some boogeyman. It's part of you that you first have to accept in order to grow better. And God, that is such a rare message to see done right, but Celeste nails it. But aside from that, Celeste is just a well-written game in general, especially in regards to its characters. Madeline and Theo are one of the best duos I've seen in games. Madeline is such a fun protagonist, as she has a lot of depth with the mental health stuff I discussed before, but she's also just super fun to watch as she's stubborn, sassy, but still kind. Conversations with her are a blast, and she bounces off Theo perfectly. Theo is another climber she meets along the way several times. They're an aspiring photographer, though they really only got a knack for selfies at the moment, who refuses to give up their optimism and good spirit at any time. They're an absolute dork, but they can also be understanding and caring. And I haven't even gotten into the side characters like Oshiro and Granny, who are just so much fun in the chapters they appear in, despite the little screen time they get. The character writing in this game is just top-notch. But before we wrap all this up, I want to discuss the feeling of determination and persistence once more, because the story mixes with the gameplay to also help build this feeling so well. You want to see Madeline overcome this, and that helps to push you through the tough gameplay. From the music hyping you up, to the forgiving gameplay making you want to keep trying, and lastly Madeline's stubbornness rubbing off on you, the game gives a feeling of determination no other game truly has. It's a special feeling that both makes the gameplay better and also enhances the story by making you feel for Madeline, as you make the harrowing climb with her every step of the way. Or something. I don't know, feel is something really hard to describe, but yeah. Anyways, let's wrap this up now. Celeste is a triumph, plain and simple. It's a game that nails every aspect of itself perfectly. It's a game that is absolutely addicting with the feeling that it instills in the player, a persistence and wanting to conquer the next challenge. It's a game that is one of the most beautiful I have seen. It's a game that tells a perfect story that needed to be heard by so many. This is the part where I'd usually say how underrated and unappreciated the game is, but no. This game got everything it deserved when it came out. It was a massive success that even big outlets called a Game of the Year contender. It sold well, became an instant classic, and got everything it wanted. This is a true indie success story right here. The little guy is able to work hard enough to soar higher than AAA ever could. As someone who has a dream of making games themselves, Celeste is a beacon of hope. I, and hopefully other aspiring game devs, recognize we probably can't beat FNAF or Undertale as a cultural cornerstone, but Celeste? Celeste is an achievable goal. It gives hope that perhaps I can scale the mountain and find the success it did. Celeste is an indie darling for a reason. It's a fantastic game that I shouldn't even have to say to play. It speaks for itself, and it's on nearly every platform for just $20, which is an absolute steal for the amount of quality and content it has. Please, give it a try if you haven't yet. It even has plenty of accessibility options for those who might need them to conquer the mountain. But that's all for now. See you in the next video, wherever that takes us.